America, it's Joseph here for Zenny62 with some thoughts about the 2020 presidential election. So, what I find personally interesting with the current state of affairs is what we've seen weeks ago, prompting me to do this video, is we have the current president, Donald Trump, during his rallies, propagate these false narratives across the country in key states that he wasn't too sure that he may win in the election. One of those being Pennsylvania. He had made these corrupt allegations against the city of Philadelphia, essentially the same thing with regards to the state of Pennsylvania. And across the country, he made similar statements. He called the Postal Service a disaster, corrupt again. He made these widespread accusations that the Democrats are going to try to steal the election. Now, I want everybody to put on their thinking hats and think about those statements. Long before any election ballots were processed or voted on, he had made these statements during his rallies. And why did he do this? He wasn't worried about talking about COVID-19. He wasn't worried about the death toll. He wasn't worried about health care. He wasn't worried about civil rights. What he was worried about is his place in the 2020 presidential election. And using the same old 2016 tactics of not speaking about issues, but talking about how everybody is corrupt. And talking about how the Postal Service is corrupt and the electoral process is corrupt. Think about the fact that he's saying this under his watch. So you mean to tell me that as the President of the United States, your leadership is that ineffective that the election process is corrupt, something you could do something about if it was corrupt, something you could do with regards to the Postal Service properly, but he didn't. The reason why this narrative of the Postal Service was trying to create a reason and an excuse to make claims that votes aren't being counted in his favor, or that someone else is trying to steal the election from him. And what do we have today? We have Rudy Giuliani in Pennsylvania making a spectacle of himself, making these false narratives and claims that the Democrats are stealing the election across the country, and that he may do a federal lawsuit so that the whole election is recounted over again. Using, again, fear tactics, lies, and innuendos to pursue lawsuits, to have certain precincts stop counting the votes because they're afraid of the outcome. Why wasn't this in 2016 the narrative that they were pushing? Right? In 2016, by his own administration staff had admitted to, is that they were surprised that they won the election. So, if you're surprised that you won the election, why didn't you stop counting and say, wait a minute, I thought I was going to lose, so let's... No, obviously no one's going to do that, and I know that. But you mean to tell me that as powerful you claim to be and how you're going to clean the swamp, you haven't done anything. You haven't, according to you, fixed the electoral process because you had 4 years to do that. If you saw the Postal Service as corrupt and not doing what it's supposed to do. You had 4 years to try to fix that. You didn't do that, but you make these false claims. But these claims were made purposely so that there's an excuse to put negative thoughts in the minds of America, to bring doubt in the electoral process. He didn't have a problem during the electoral process in 2016. But now that the tides have turned and those electoral votes are favoring Joe Biden, now there's a big problem. There's a big issue. And why would you say weeks ago that you're going to file a lawsuit to do a recount and do X, Y, and Z? Because you knew that their time was up. And he strategically knew that the places that he would have a challenge in winning, he started calling out those precincts, those states, or those cities, so that he has an excuse to come in, try to bully himself, try to strong arm those city, states, or precincts, so they kowtow to him. He has his minions out there, strong arm them with lawsuits and, doing this bravado talk, the same thing Cohen did before he left Trump. And that's what Rudy Giuliani took his place. Because he's afraid. He's afraid. I guarantee you, if these electoral votes were switched the other way, again, CNN has it at 253 to 213. Other national polls in the AP, I believe, have it at 264 to 214. So in theory, all we need is Nevada with 6 more points, and Joe Biden becomes the next president of the United States. Earlier this morning, before the votes were finally tallied and certified, he claimed victory in Michigan. Because he's trying to change the narrative by putting it out there in the world so that you don't question him. If anybody's ever seen a movie called Wag the Dog in 1997, he's taken a page out of that book and he's trying to paint this narrative, this false media that he puts out there. He is the fake media, in my opinion, because when you have false narratives put out there in the world and claim them as fact, when in reality, when you fact check any of those statements, they're not true. And again, I got to reiterate to you, America, that if those electoral votes were flipped the other way and he had 264 and Joe Biden had 213, none of this would be happening. No lawsuits would have been filed because we have a great electoral process and the people have spoken. But now that the electoral process is doing its job and the people have spoken, he doesn't want that. And it's very dictatorial. It's like a dictatorship that's going on here, because if you don't get your way, you'll find a way to bend it your way. And that's exactly what he's trying to do, in my opinion. The writing is on the wall. This would not have happened if he had those 264 electoral votes. You would have seen him. You would have seen him in every media channel. He would have been bombarding Twitter, claiming victory and moving forward and asking to Joe Biden to basically hand over on the mantle and say, Joe, you lost. Get over it. Do the right thing. And guess what? He's not doing the right thing. It's inevitable, if you look at the numbers, that Joe Biden more than likely will win the 2020 presidential election. But having said that, it's almost guaranteed that the current administration will find a way to try to challenge it and try to make this false claims and narratives with regards to the election. You didn't have that in 2016. We all know what happened in 2016. But the one thing Hillary Clinton didn't do is yell and scream and talk about how our electoral process is corrupt. She did not yell and scream and say we're going to file a lawsuit to do a recount across the country. She bowed out gracefully for the benefit, she felt of the country. Now, when you have the current president who only cares about one thing only, and that's himself, that won't happen this presidential election. But I want to call out also the national media for putting out there in the world that this is a cliffhanger. It's only a cliffhanger because you made it a cliffhanger. When you have an electoral vote at 264 versus 213, to me, that's not a cliffhanger. That's not a cliffhanger. But by putting out that false statement out there, or that statement that you want to create this anticipation, you're doing a disservice to this country. By that same token, we got to go out there for those of us who want this to go down the right way. You call out those national media outlets and say, wait a minute, it's not a cliffhanger. Are you looking at the same polls that I am? Are you looking at the same electoral votes that I am? Don't try to dissuade the inevitable because you're afraid to call something, when in 2016 you called it right away for Donald Trump. There was no cliffhanger there. You know, once he had the lead, you guys were calling the states. But don't call this a cliffhanger when Joe Biden is showing 264 electoral votes and Donald Trump has 214. And when you have Nevada favoring Joe Biden with, I don't know how many tens of thousands of votes still out there left, but he has the lead. And those are the 6 electoral votes that would put Joe Biden into the presidential seat. So again, I want to reiterate is that why, since you're losing, all of a sudden this electoral process is corrupt. You're filing lawsuits to stop the inevitable from happening and to delay your loss. For the first time in your life, I think the president should do the right thing. Read the tea leaves, read the writing on the wall, whatever anecdotes you want to use. Do the right thing. In America, keep an eye on those national news outlets. You call them out. You call them out. Because don't let them try to change this election by putting out false information out there. Read the electoral votes. Look at the county registrar's office. Count the votes. The votes are there for Joe Biden. If all of a sudden it switches, that's where the corruption happens. Keep it here on Zenny62, and don't forget to like and subscribe.